You can go back over here to the vSwitch and click Edit and then back to NIC Teaming, and you'll find that you now have a set of active adapters by which you can set the load balancing and other types of policies associated with the NIC team. There are multiple different load balancing policies available. You can route based off of the originating virtual port ID, based on IP hash. This is a fairly common one. Source MAC hash, or you can use an explicit failover order, which would allow you to identify whether or not, or which adapter would be used first, and then which one would be the standby or failover adapter. Most people here use route based on IP hash. Again, that provides some of the functionality necessary for different types of networking traffic. We have the ability also for determining how we want to identify whether or not there has been a network failover or not. We can do so via link status or via beacon probing. I can notify the upstream switches if I want, and then I can identify whether or not I want to automatically fail back or not. These active adapters here can also be adjusted if I want. And for example, if I don't want to do load balancing and I want to use an explicit failover order, I can choose to move VMNIC1 down, and VMNIC1 will only be used at this point if there's a failure to VMNIC0. So what this does is it gives me a little bit of options for how I will identify what the NIC teaming configuration will be for this switch. Now I'll tell you though that in this environment I don't actually have the necessary networking stuff set up. So I'm actually going to remove VMNIC1 from this vSwitch because I'm going to use it for other purposes here in just a minute. Removing VNIC1, as you can see, is a relatively simple process, and now I have the ability to use this physical adapter, just a single physical adapter instead of the dual physical adapters. So at this point, with that limitation in place, let's assume that we want to set up the storage networking connection so that we can support a separate connection to whatever storage we want to for this server. Now, I don't necessarily want to team the adapters here because, again, I just don't have the necessary infrastructure in place to be able to do that. But what I can do is, in fact, create another vSwitch down here at the bottom that I'll use to attach a separate physical adapter in to a separate VM kernel port for the purposes of what we'll use a little bit later, which is iSCSI storage connection. Now what I want to do here is I want to click the Add Networking button. What you can see here is I can add in either a new virtual machine port group or a VM kernel port. Now in this case, a VM kernel port handles the traffic for ESXi services like vMotion, iSCSI, NFS, and host management. I'm currently using that VM kernel port for host management up in the first vSwitch, vSwitch 0. If I click the next button here, you'll see that I can create a new vSphere standard switch. I can assign VMNIC1 to that vSphere standard switch, and I can assign it a network label. Let's call it storage instead of VM kernel. Now you'll notice here that I have the option of choosing a VLAN ID, and because I'm using access layer ports, I'm just going to set this to none. But if I'd had the other situation where I had a small number of bundled cables together that had multiple VLANs attached to them, well then I could identify a VLAN ID here if I wanted to. This would give me the ability to have a single pair of connections running multiple VLANs across those connections. When I have this set up, I can choose to use this port group, for example, for vMotion, or for fault tolerance logging, or for management traffic. Now in this situation,